Has immigration been good for Britain?
Well, I think after my question to Keir Starmer yesterday, the answer to that is very definitely no. And certainly in Great Yarmouth, I think people generally feel it's damaged and disrupted their local community. And as I said yesterday, it's also put a lot of pressure on their public services. So I think people are beginning to see the effects of mass immigration, uncontrolled, untargeted, which actually started in 1997 under Tony Blair. He is responsible for the Human Rights Act of 1998, which embeds within it the ECHR, which is the root cause of why we now have this immigration crisis. And as Nigel said in Parliament, unless we leave the ECHR, we will find it almost impossible to resolve the problems that we're currently having managing our own borders, which is what people voted for, 17.4 million of them, in 2016, which has clearly not happened.
Are you concerned about demographic, ethnic changes to Britain?
Well, look, I'm in favour of limited, targeted immigration, which addresses either skill shortages or demographic problems which need to be filled with new labour. But it needs to be targeted and it needs to be planned. I am concerned that immigration is now out of control. The answer I got from Sir Keir Starmer yesterday was clearly, he said he disputed my numbers. Well, I didn't give him any numbers. I said there were millions of people who'd come in since '97. More than 10 million have come in. That's people we know about, legally and illegally. And even last year alone, 1.25 million came in and 500,000 left. So we ultimately still have a major problem. That's a city the size of Bristol. And as a country, we cannot go on importing these people. A lot of them are single males. They are, I'm afraid, not asylum seekers. They are economic migrants. And our leadership is just too weak to deal with the situation, largely because it's got one hand tied behind its back, as I say, because of the Human Rights Act of 1998.
I suppose the question I'm really asking is about how British culture has changed. Many people have told us that they don't feel that Britain is Britain anymore. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think that's certainly true, and there was a reason why Reform have had 3 MPs elected on the East Coast. Obviously myself in Great Yarmouth, Richard Tice in Boston Skegness, and Nigel in Clacton. I think, even though Great Yarmouth is plagued by it, it's still fortunate to have its own, if you like, identity. I think people know each other, and if they don't know each other, they know somebody who does know each other. So it's still a tight-knit community, which I don't think now is the case for those cities or those places which are near London. So if you take, the Berkshires, the Wiltshires, the Hampshires, the Gloucestershires, the Oxfordshires, those counties are now as full of people who come from London at the weekend as they are of their own market towns and their own local communities. So I think you have to go to the rural areas, the areas which basically have been left behind by the post-war elite. And as you know, the fishing industry here has been decimated by our sort of treaty with the EU, which sacrificed our fishing, it sacrificed our fish processing, and to some extent it's damaged our farming industry. So I think the rural areas are still, they have their identity and they actually know who they are. I don't think a lot of the urban areas do, and I think there is a schism growing between those two parts of Britain. And I'm afraid I'm firmly in the camp. I want to live in a country where people do have a community, they do have an identity, and actually if people want to come here, they should come here on our terms, they should adopt our language, they should adopt our culture, and they should fully sign up to what we stand for and the libertarian values that basically make us what we are.
How has immigration changed Great Yarmouth?
Well, again, I think a lot of the seaside towns have found that whether you call them economic migrants, asylum seekers, whatever you call them, a lot of these people have been settled in holiday towns for several reasons. Firstly, you've got accommodation which is often empty for half the year. and therefore it's readily available. And secondly, it's often property's quite cheap here. So I think, again, these people have been settled here, and it has damaged and changed the way in which people feel about their area. And I think people here are genuinely concerned. And if you think I came here on May the 10th, I'm not as I say, I'm not a sort of anti-targeted immigration, and I think I'm a pretty open-minded sort of free marketeer. But I think if you go too far, and we have definitely gone too far, you know, when you've got, and it's not just immigration, I think it's lots of things that are designed to detract people's attention from what's really happening in government. So initiatives like diversity, inclusion, quotas, that I think is, again, it's a cancer in our society. The more diversity officers you have, the more people spread diversity. The more inclusion officers, they spread inclusion. The more regulators you have, they spread regulation. And you know, we've got these quangos, these unaccountable quangos that have grown up everywhere, which now serve themselves and actually damage Britain. And until we get a force from outside the existing establishment, the two-party state, you know, I've attended a few meetings in Parliament which are frankly deeply depressing. There's this sort of left-wing view of life which isn't prepared to embrace any other view except their own, and it's now completely taken over the organs of government. It's still not taken over yet the real economy and the real parts of Britain, and I honestly think this is the last chance that we've got as a people to try and bring some common sense and logic to the way in which we're governed and to the way in which we make sure that Parliament returns to what it should be doing, which is putting the basic interests of Britons at the top of the agenda, and also prioritising those people who work hard, pay their taxes, employ people, take risk, and actually contribute to their society. And you know, it's depressing to think that we've got to where we have, and the structures that we have now are so intolerant of actually even considering that they may have got it wrong.
There are those who say that immigration has been good for Britain, diversity, the food is better, makes us a more interesting place. What do you think about that?
Well, I'm not interested in that. I think at the end of the day, what we're seeing, and as you probably know, GDP per capita is actually lower than it was. If you target immigration carefully, you end up with GDP per capita going up because you're actually augmenting and improving what the structures that you've got. But no, as I said to you, I think we don't know who these people are who are coming in now. A lot of them come in illegally. I think we find it easier to just give them citizenship rather than challenging them and sending them back to where they should be going. As I say, a lot of them are young men. A lot of them have a different religion to the religion that we have here. We don't know what their objectives are because we're not screening them properly, and I think that's extremely dangerous. Now, I have nothing against them. That's you know, if they come here and we're weak enough to allow them to stay, that's in a way our problem, because we should have a government that manages our borders properly and looks after the interests of the British people above all else.
We have, of course, seen Islamist violence. Sir David Amos was stabbed and murdered. We've seen the Manchester bombing attack. Over the last 20 years, there's been lots of Islamist violence.
What we've got to all be concerned about is, has the sort of what I call experiment with creating a multicultural society, are we beginning to see the first sort of plumes of volcanic eruption coming up from the dis-ease which is created by a sort of an unplanned and ill-considered concept, which I think in the end can't work unless it's very carefully managed.
There have been accusations against Reform that it is a racist party. Candidates have been accused of racism. What do you make of that?
Well, that's rubbish, patently rubbish. And you know, I've always said that it is not racist to have a concern about untargeted, unplanned, mass legal and illegal immigration. It's not racist to have that view. And equally, but it's a very easy argument for the left to make, something which they think is going to effectively tar reform. My view of reform is now the people. Reform is the last hope that the British people have got of getting back what they used to have, which is, I think, a country which has the most able people, the most decent people, the most civilized people, and effectively what we've got to do is try and take back what we rightly should have, which is our own country, our own culture, and put the British people at the top of the agenda. How can we effectively influence the world with our decency, our libertarianism, and our sort of respect for life if we weaken ourselves to the extent that we cease to have any political, economic, or indeed military influence anywhere, which is ultimately what will happen if we go on the course we're going at the moment.